Welcome back, game developers. Today we are going to be creating an inventory system similar to Resident Evil 7. In this first part of the tutorial, we will be creating the inventory widget, adapting our previous interactable items to be able to go into the inventory, adding stackable items, and dynamically generating them into the inventory. This will also work if you are new and following along with different interactable objects that you've made yourself. By the way, this is part 1. In part 2, we will be implementing logic to interact with our inspectable items and pick them up after inspecting. We'll be implementing healing from inventory and the access bar that is present in the Resident Evil inventory. Compared to my other tutorials, this will be a bit longer and more complex, so make sure you follow along with every single thing I'm doing if you want to recreate the same effect. Also, it would be really appreciated if you guys could like, subscribe, and comment down below more videos you guys would like to see in the future. But before we get started, if you would like to support me, get all the files you're seeing today and from every other tutorial I've done, get early access to videos, as well as see your name along with the other people here, I have a link for my Patreon down below. Alright, with that being said, let's get right into the tutorial. The first thing we're going to actually want to do is we're going to want to create a new folder, and that will be specifically for our inventory. So let's go into our first person folder and let's right click, create a new folder, and let's call it inventory. Inside of that folder, we're going to make sure we have all of the different models or images that we're going to be using for our inventory. So from my other folder over here, I have some of the images that I made myself, so I'll go through them. So I'll import them right now. We have the inventory background. Also, all of these, like, they look white right now, but all you have to do is go into them and change the texture group to from world to UI, and make sure that the compression setting is on user interface 2D, and save and close. Also, there's a little bit of an easier way to do it. You can right click on them or hold left shift and click on one, and then click on the other, then right click, then asset actions, and make sure you go down to edit selection in property matrix. Then you can go over to the details panel. Make sure up here you click UI, and right here for compression setting you click user interface 2D. After that you can save, and it'll also do both of them at the same time, which is a little bit more convenient than just doing one at a time. Now that you have all three of these, I'll go through them very quickly. This will be the background of the inventory, so essentially the text will go right here, the description will go right here, and our grid will be dynamically drawn right here. Here is an individual row of our inventory. You'll see what we do with that. Basically, we do that horizontally and vertically. And here is an individual item slot where we're going to have an item in our inventory, similar to what you've seen in the beginning video. Great, so now that we have all of these, we're going to now import some of the models that we're going to be using for our inventory items today. Great, so now I've imported two different meshes that I got from Sketchfab. By the way, all of the images that I personally created, so if we go back to first person and then inventory, these images that I created myself will be in the description below if you would like to download them. But the meshes that I got from Sketchfab, you can replace with any meshes you want, or if you want on my Patreon, I will have these exact same meshes in this entire folder there for you to download. Now, if I go back to the meshes, you'll see that we have a bandage right here, and we also have a pill bottle. So those are the two items that I will be working with for this specific tutorial. You can implement any item that you see fit. On top of that, we're going to want to make sure that each of these items have their own cover image. So you can see mine isn't perfect. This isn't like obviously coherent in the way that it should be, but this will do the job for this tutorial. So I will do the exact same thing I did previously, where I changed the compression settings to user interface 2D, change the texture group to UI, and save that, and then go back. So that's for the pill bottle that I have. And then if I go to the bandage, I will implement the same exact image that I have for this one. So here is that image. I'll just go back into it and do the same exact thing. So change this to UI, change this to user interface 2D. And then now that we have that, we have everything we need to start getting started. So if we migrate back to our first person folder, we're going to want to make sure that we actually have an input action so we can interact with our inventory. So let's go to our input, let's go to actions, and let's duplicate one of the ones that we already have. So IA_couch, for example, and let's create IA_inventory. And we can open this up and make sure everything's good. Yep, everything seems good. So we can close this, go into our input mapping context, and make sure that we now create this new mapping. So open that one up, make sure we go to inventory, get the inventory, and then open that up and change this to whatever button you would like. For my inventory, I'm going to make it tab. So for the tab key, you will press the inventory button. So now that we have this, we can close the input mapping context and start actually getting to work on our specific inventory. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure that we actually start creating the structure that will hold all of our data for our items. So let's go to our inventory and let's start organizing this. So let's go to all this textures, or we can call it images, whatever that you would like to. I'll call mine textures, and that will be the background textures that we have. And on top of that, we're going to create a instead of creating a folder for this, because this is a main proponent of the inventory, we're just going to keep it in the main folder, and we're going to go to the blueprints and create a structure. Call it s_item, and this will be a structure that holds all of the data for our item. So let's open this up and let's dock it. And it starts with a boolean, which is good because that's what we want to start with first. We basically want to know firstly if this is an item that you want to go into the inventory, because we have multiple different items. We have items that are inspectable, healable, whatever that we've made previously, but we want to know if this is an item that should go into the inventory. So if this should, then we want to have item inventory question mark, and that'll be the first boolean that we have. Let's create another variable, and let's make this one a text variable right here, and let's change it to item name. So name of the item description, be the description of the item, obviously. Now let's make another boolean variable, except this time it's going to be if this item is stackable. So for example, if we have item stackable, if we have an item that is like a note, if we collect multiple notes, they probably aren't stackable, they probably are each different. But if we have, for example, apples, 1 apple, 2 apple, 3 apples, you might want them to be stackable. So that's what we'll have there. In addition, right after item stackable, we're going to want to do item amount. So how many of there are in that certain item that you're interacting with. So for this, we're going to want to have an integer because it'll be a whole number. After that, we're going to want to get the item mesh. So whatever the mesh is of that item, that's important to us because when we drop the item, we want to be able to drop that specific mesh. So let's look for static mesh. Right here, static mesh, object reference. That's exactly what we want. And after that, we're going to want to get the item image and go over here and make sure you get a texture 2D. That's how we're going to represent our image. Go to texture 2D, object reference, perfect. And we're then going to want to get a couple more, but these last two ones are mainly for the next tutorial as well. So obviously all of these are catered to how you want your items. If you're following along with the tutorials, then you want to have the same ones I have, but if you have more things, then you're going to want to make sure to account for those. But this one will be if the item is healable. So for example, if it is a pill bottle or whatever that we're going to interact with, or a bandage, if we wanted to heal us, then we're going to tick this boolean once we develop our struct and break it later on in the tutorial. But basically this is going to make it so we can differentiate between a healable item versus a non-healable item. In addition, let's make sure we create another variable that's an integer and just do the item heal amount. Great, let's save all of this, and this is what we're going to need for our current struct as of the first part of this tutorial. So we can close this, go back, and now we're going to actually create our widget to make our inventory look how it is supposed to look. So let's right click, go to user interface, and go down to widget blueprint. Let's click on the user widget and call it w_inventory grid. Great, and let's open that up and dock it. And the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get a canvas panel. That's always usually what we want to first do. Let's get a canvas panel and compile and save. And I'm going to reference my other inventory just so we have it the exact same. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get a border. So let's make sure we get a border and put that right on the canvas panel. We're going to want to make sure this border is a variable, and we're going to call it inventory border. Let's make sure we anchor it to the right side of the screen because that's where it is in Resident Evil. We're basing it off of that after all. So let's go for a -600 position X and a -450 position Y. Then we're going to change the size x to be 450 by 900. And so that will be the size of our inventory. Obviously not fully white, but this will be the size of our inventory. Let's change for future use. Let's change the z order to -1. That won't matter right now, but it will once we add certain things in the next part of the tutorial. After this, make sure that the padding is 0 across the board, so there's no padding involved. And let's actually make the tint black, but change it to be a little opaque. So let's change it to 0.8 so you can see through it a little bit, just like this. And this will give the background color of our inventory. And let's make sure, just to have no confusion or problems, we change the same for brush color and change this to 0.8. And just like that, we can, if we want to, we can also make this 0, or sorry, we can make this 1, and it'll make it either darker or lighter. That's up to you, however you would like to do it. After this, we're going to want to get another element. Let's get an overlay, and let's put that on top of that border. This overlay will also be a variable, so let's make it a variable and let's call it background overlay. Great, now that we have that, we want to make sure that this overlay takes up the full space, which it does right here. And really, this overlay is just used so we can lay multiple elements on top of one another on one element, so that'll be the overlay element. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get an image. If I could spell it correctly, let's get an image and let's put that on top of that overlay. Now this image is going to be the inventory background, so we're going to want to make it the full size, and then we're going to want to search for the inventory background like so. And you can see that now the inventory background will have the lines all throughout, and it's sized to fit this exact same thing. So if you want to create your own inventory background, basically you're going to want to create an image that's the same exact proportion, so 450 by 900 or however big you make your inventory, and adjust it accordingly. Great, so now that we have that, we want to basically rename this to be inventory background EG, and that will basically be our outlining background. After this, let's create two texts, one for the item name and another for the background. So firstly, it'll be item name, and this will be a variable. Make sure that we change the padding accordingly, so it'll be 20 and then 600, I believe. Yep, to have it right in this location. Let's make sure that we go down, change the typeface to regular size to 20, and then I think this is good for us, but we want to make sure that this text updates accordingly every single time. So what we can do is we can go to the graph and let's create a variable. Let's make this variable t underscore item name, or just item name like that. And since there's a space, it won't give you an error. If you had them all one word, kind of like this with camel case, it would give you an error. But let's create another one as well, and let's call this item description. And so now we have item name and item description. For the item name, all we wanted to do is go up to binding and change it to item name like so, and compile and save. And then we're going to want to do the same exact thing kind of, but we want this to be for item description. We can change it like so, and then just make sure that we go to like this, and we're going to change the padding. So instead of 600, it's going to be 670, down a little bit more to right here where the description should be. And we're going to want it not to be all the way over here, so let's change the right padding to be 20 as well as the left, so it's even. And then change the bottom so it's not all the way down here. Let's change that to 100, just so it has this space that it's occupying. Additionally, let's change the font to be something like 16, so it's a little bit smaller than the title font. And let's change the color and opacity to be something gray. Let's try 0.281 across, so let's do that like so. And I think that's a good shade for us. Make sure to also go to this binding for the description and change that to item description. Now compile and save. Perfect. So now that we have the background overlay, we want to add another overlay, but this one will be for the grid. Let's look for overlay, excuse me. Let's put that on top of this canvas panel. Now we will have this grid. This grid is going to be, or this overlay is going to be called grid overlay. Make sure that it is a variable, and we're going to want to change it so that the dimensions are in the correct location. So similar to how they were before, we're going to want to make sure that it's anchored to the right like so, and make sure that it has the same dimensions. So it would be -600, then -410, and then make sure that the size is proportional. So this will be a little bit different size though. It's gonna be 450 by 400. So it's going to take up this location inside of this inventory. And I think that's a good one, or a good spot, because if you want to add rows, you can always do so while not interfering with the text or the description. Great, so now off of this grid overlay, we're going to want to make a wrap box. And this wrap box is basically going to be used, put it on here. This wrap box specifically is going to be used to generate the grids or the rows and columns of our grid. So we can just call this grid. And this one is going to be kind of hard-coded for now, but we might change that later depending on if we pick up like a backpack or something and it creates more rows for us. So what we want to do is, let's go to grid, and off of grid, let's go to here and create an image. Let's get 3 images. So let's go 1, 2, and then 3 images. Make this first one first row, then second row, and then third row. And so now we have basically a setup of multiple different rows. What we want to do is we want to use the inventory row image. So go inventory row, the one that we imported to begin with, and we're going to change a couple of settings about them. We want to fill empty space and force the new line. Additionally, we want to make sure that we change the image size. So the image size will be 450 by 100 or 100 flat, sorry. And so now what this is going to do is it's going to make it so we have these ones. So what we can do actually is just delete these and now duplicate these. So now you'll see these different rows came in. So this one will be second row, and this final one will be third row. Great, so now you can see we have these different rows, but we don't have the vertical columns or other half of the grid essentially. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create another overlay, and this is just the way that I did it. I'm sure there's other ways you could do it as well, but let's put it on this grid, and on this overlay we're basically going to create all of the vertical rows. So let's make sure that we get more images. Let's call this vertical, and let's get more images, and these will be, essentially be used to create the vertical look of the row. So let's make sure that we align it the way that it should be. So this should again be like this, and this will take up basically a final row. So I'll show you basically what that means. So let's make sure of a couple things first. So make sure you go to vertical, and then make sure that the fill empty space is true and force new line is true again. And now with this image, let's make sure that we change the name to be first column. And we're going to want to make sure again to change the sizing of this image. So we're going to want to make this X 32, but make sure you change the Y to 100. That's going to change what this looks like right now, but we're also going to want to change how it appears in things. So let's make sure that we go again to inventory row, change that, and we're then going to want to make sure that we change the horizontal or the vertical alignment. So we're basically going to do a translation on it to change. So if you go down here to render transform, you can change the translation. So I changed mine to minus 150, and then change this to be minus 200. And essentially what that does is it'll change the location, the translation of it. And then we're going to change the angle to minus 90. And you can see now that makes that vertical, which is exactly what we wanted originally. I'm also going to change the scale X to 0.75. And now you can see it fits perfectly inside of this original 3x4. So we're then going to duplicate this. So let's create a second row, or second column, excuse me. And we're going to have to basically change the translation to now adapt for this new location. So if we go to the second column, this new translation should be basically incrementing by 100 on the x-axis. So it should be -50 now. And additionally, we're going to want to do that again and make a third column and change the translation to be 50 now, because you're incrementing by 100 like I was saying. And then final one, so fourth column, and we're then going to make this 150. And you can see like so, now we have a quadrant of a 3x4. So this will be perfect for us for our actual inventory. Now what we want to do is we can minimize this right here and get out of this grid overlay, and now we're going to want to actually populate our inventory. So we're going to work on that actual space now. So that will be in the inventory overlay. So let's make sure we go to another overlay and the final overlay for this. And let's put this on the canvas panel again. Call this inventory overlay. Make sure this is a variable. And make sure that we have the same settings that we're supposed to have. So again, we're going to want to make sure to change the anchor to the right. Make sure this is -600, -410. And change the size X to be 450 and the size Y to be 300. And by the way, if you want to make your own rows, the reason why this works is because each of these rows that I originally had with that one image is 100 pixels in the Y direction. So that's why we make it 300, because there's 3 rows going downward vertically. So we're going to have 300 for that. Perfect. So now inside of this overlay, we're going to want to make sure that we add a wrap box again. So this wrap box is going to now holster all of the different items that get spawned into our inventory. So let's get this and let's call this wrap box inventory. And so now this will be the inventory that holds our wrap box. So make sure that we change some things. So firstly, to get the padding correct, because it's going to spawn the item right here, we want to change the left and the right padding to be by 25. So now it'll only do the section that we have in here. Additionally, we're going to want to change it to be horizontal and vertical alignment. So now you can really see it's really just only in these bars right here. We have a little bit overhang because that's what Resident Evil has in their inventory system. You can obviously change that to fit yours more if you would like to change that. And now we have replicated what the inventory should look like as of right now. If you want to, obviously you could put a vignette around the screen or something if you're in your inventory, or change some sound effects or whatever you would like to do. But as of right now, that's what we'll do for this tutorial. So now after this, all of these different inventory item slots need their own widget as well, because that's how we're going to populate this wrap box. We're basically going to be adding widgets for each of the items independently. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create another widget, and this widget is going to be go to user interface, go to widget blueprint, and let's create another one, and it's going to be w_item slot. Now this item will be held in this specific widget here. So let's make sure that we have a couple things. Firstly, we need a size box, and the reason for this is because we have a specific size that we need for each item. So in order to change this, we're going to want to change the height override and the width override right over here. Let's change them to 100 each, and you'll see right now that nothing is changing, and the reason for that is because this is on fill screen. We need to change this to be desired on screen, and now you can see that it changes to the actual sizing. So it should be 100 by 100. We're then going to want to make sure that we have a button inside of this size box. So let's create a button, and this will essentially be how we click on anything inside the size box. So, or anything for the button. So this will basically make it so when we click on this, there will be the item selection that appears for whatever action we want to do, whether it's combining, whether it's healing, whether it's deleting the item, whatever we want to do. This will basically holster all of those mechanics. All right, so a couple things we're going to want to change is we're going to want to make sure there's no opacity for this button. For hovered, we're going to want to make sure there is a level of opacity, but the only thing we want to do is a slight opacity. So we can go to int, and instead of it being so high, let's make it something like 0.38, and let's do the same here, and that will be a slight gray effect over the images once you or over the button once you hover over it. And for the pressed, we can make sure it's the exact same, just like this. So that's for the pressed, and for the hovered, it's the same exact one. Great. So now let's create an overlay as well. Let's put that on top of this button. Also, this button, we can rename it to be item button. And this overlay, we can keep it just like so. We're going to want to change this though to be the full size of the screen. We can change this padding right here to be 0, and it'll change it to be 0 padding. And I think we're getting this because the button has a little bit of padding as well. So if you scroll down right here to normal padding on the button, we want to change that to 0 as well, and change this to 0 as well for the normal and pressed padding. And now we're going to see it takes up the full size of the screen. This overlay does, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now inside of this overlay, we're using an overlay because we're going to have multiple elements. So let's get an image, put that firstly on the overlay, and this image is basically going to be the inventory slot image. And again, we're going to want to make sure it takes up the full screen, just like so. We're going to want to change the image though to be our inventory slot. So if you go over here, again, we have an inventory slot, and now it takes up the perfect size that we would like. And for my personal one, I changed the opacity to be 0.5 here, so it's a little bit dimmer than it actually was in the image. I feel like it gives a better effect in the inventory. Perfect. So now lastly, we're going to want to make sure that we have, if it's a stackable item, we have a little indicator showing how many of the item we have. So let's create a border and let's put it underneath the overlay. And this border will be, make sure it's going to be the full size, but we're going to want to make sure that it's always in the, horizontal alignment here and vertical alignment there. So it's in the bottom left, but it is going to be full size. We're going to want to make sure we keep the padding how it is, but we're going to want to change the brush color to be a blacker tone. So it's a background, and we're going to want to change it to about 0.24. Great. So now once we have this, let's make sure we go to get another element. Let's get the text, and this will make it bigger just like so. Let's make sure this text, we call this item amount, and we call this border item amount border, because independently that's what they are. Let's also not forget to make this item amount border a variable, and the item amount is also going to be a variable. For reference, we can just change this number to 1 just to see how it would look. Because this is going to get overwritten anyways, I'm going to change this to be Roboto Light and change the size. Actually, I'm going to keep the size the same, and everything else can stay the way that it is. Great, so now that we have this, let's replicate some of the custom events that we need for refreshing each slot. So one of these slots in itself needs to refresh every single time a new item is picked up. So for one of the items, let's make sure that we create a custom event. And let's call this refresh lots. Bring it in a little bit closer. Bring it like so. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make sure that we get a couple things first before we even refresh. We're going to need the actual item that we're using. So we can get the item and make sure you change the type to be s_item. And that is the structure that we created previously. If you have multiple for whatever reason and you don't know which one is which, you can always just go in here and break it and make sure that it has all of the variables that you would like to have. Perfect. So this is the one we want, and actually we also want to break it because we want some of the values from it. So let's go off of the image and we want to see if it is valid. The reason for this is because if the image is not valid and there's no image set, then we know that there is no item in that specific slot. So if there is no item in that slot, then we basically don't want to show the border showing how many value or how many item quantity there is. So it'll make more sense once we go through it, but let's just keep going. After this, we're going to want to make sure we get the inventory slot image, and we're going to want to set brush from texture. And so this is why we needed it to be a texture 2D for the struct for the image. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get the item image and put that right into texture, because now we're assuming if this is valid, if it does exist in this struct, in this instance of the slot, then that means that this one actually holds an item. So if it actually holds an item, then that image is going to be valid, and if it's valid, that means that it needs to be set because there is an item that's trying to populate that inventory slot. Perfect. So now that we know this, we need to see one thing though, because if it's stackable, then we want to show what we made previously, this little 1 in the bottom or whatever updated number it will be. But if it's not stackable, then we don't want to show that. So luckily for us, we have the item stackable right here. Let's reroute it so we can keep it a little bit more clean and just run it through here and press Q so it's a little bit more straight. Okay, so if it is stackable, we're going to want to change the text to be whatever text the item amount is. So let's go off of this and let's basically get the item amount, and let's set the text here. Not this one. Let's set text and go up here to set text. Grab that, go right into true. And if it is, then we're going to want to basically get the integer from the item amount, this amount right here, and we're going to want to put it right into this text, and that'll automatically make it to your node. We'll keep it like this, and again, just making them all straight like so. Now, if this is false, then what that means is it's not a stackable item, and so it doesn't need to show this border right here. So this whole border right here can just go away, just like so, and since it's not stackable, there will be nothing there like this. That's pretty easy to do. All we have to do is make sure we go off of this, and thankfully we made it a variable. So let's go off of this variable and set to visibility, and you want to basically make it hidden. Now if we go off of here, go to this false, we can straighten this up a little bit. Let's move this over a tiny bit. Go all straight again. And so now this false will basically make it so it's hidden. So we can go into the game right now, and I want to see if, firstly, our inventory button even works. So when I press tab, nothing happens. And the reason for that is because we haven't actually implemented it into our character yet. So we will do that right after this, but let's make sure, firstly, that this works. And we're again going to want to actually make sure this is not valid, goes off of here as well. And the reason for that is because if we have a situation where this is not valid, that means there's no inventory slot there that's full. We don't want to show this border. So because then it would have the bottom left with that one number for every single slot, even though there was no slot there. There's no image there. There is no item there. Great. So now we have a fully functional system. So let's make sure we have it all straight. Make sure we have it all commented in a second. Actually, no comments. I think it'll be okay. And let's just compile and save. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go back to our inventory folder, and let's create our actual blueprint component, our inventory component. So we can go to blueprint class, go to actor component, and let's call this BPC for blueprint component underscore inventory component. And this is really where all the magic will happen with our inventory. So let's open this up. And first thing we want to do is let's make sure that we don't forget to add it to our first person character. Let's go to our first person character, go to add, and we want to look up BPC underscore, and there it is, inventory component. It might take a second like it did right there, but as long as we have it in this bottom right here, then every single thing that we run on this inventory component actor will be ran on the character as well. And this kind of makes it more flexible. If we have multiple characters, they will all have inventories as long as it's replicated, and it makes it so we don't have to keep clogging up our event graph here. It can just be all within the inventory component. Great, so let's go into the inventory component and start working on some of the functionality. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually create our widget. So on event begin play, we can actually create our inventory widget. Let's just create widget, and it's going to be of class w underscore inventory grid. This will hold our inventory. We can get rid of event tick and keep those for now. Straighten it out, and we want to basically make this a variable because we're going to be referencing this a bunch of times. So let's get this and call this inventory reference. This will reference our inventory, and off of this we're essentially going to want to do all the things we want to do at the beginning of the game. So usually what will be done here is like changing the size of the inventory to be the specific amount that you would want it to be. So let's create some variables so we can reference those every single time. So let's create one variable, and this will be the items. So let's call s underscore item, and we want to make this of the array type, so no longer a single. Let's make it an array, and this will basically be our items in our inventory. So we can call it items, or we can call it inventory, whatever you'd like to do. Let's get that variable, and let's make sure that we also have the current index. This will make more sense later, but let's just create it. That'll be of type integer, and this will no longer be of an array type. This is going to be a single. If you're confused what an array is basically a list of multiple different values. So because we're having the value stored as s underscore items, they're all structures, we're going to have an array to store all of the different s underscore items. Hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have questions, leave them down in the comments and I would be happy to answer them. After this, we're going to want to duplicate this, and let's make a max amount per item. And after that, let's make another one, but before we forget, let's change the default value to be 30. So this is, and you can change this to whatever you'd really like, but this is basically if you have multiple of one item, how many you can stack. So I made it so you can stack 30. So for example, if there's, I don't know, 30 apples, you can have 30 apples in one particular slot, then it would move to the next slot. Great, so let's go to the next one, and the next one is going to be inventory size. And again, this is personal to you. I would recommend though, because our grid is a 4 here, we want to basically make it a multiple of 4 for the system. So if you do create another horizontal grid right here, if you make another row, if you make that a 4th row like that, or for example, and then change the translations to all match, if you made a 4th row, you're going to want to make sure that you make it 16. If it's 3 rows, it's 12. If it's 2 rows, it's 8, and so on. So that's how we're going to do it. And so in doing that, let's get the inventory size to be 12 for our instance of our inventory. And we can always change that obviously later if we pick up a backpack or something like that, like it is in Resident Evil. And then let's make the new item amount. And this is basically going to be the item amount after we do some calculations to see if it can fit in the... Perfect. So now that we have this, let's get some of these variables. So let's get the items and let's basically resize this because we want to resize this array to have as many inventory slots as we want in our inventory. So let's get our inventory size and basically feed both of those in. So now our inventory will be of the size of our inventory, if that makes sense. It's resized to now fit perfectly with each other. So this and keep it like so. Now that we've done this, it hasn't actually set in and refreshed our widget. So we need to make sure we cast our widget right here and change this so it's representable on our widget. So in doing so, let's go back to our inventory grid. Let's go to the event graph and let's make a function that will make it so every single time we refresh our widget, it actually goes into effect. So let's create a function. Let's call this refresh inventory. So now this is going to refresh our inventory every single time we call upon this function. What we're going to need is we're going to need the inventory component. So let's go inventory component, this BPC underscore inventory component, and make sure that is of type object reference like so. And you can move that out just to make sure everything is good. And then let's call this inventory reference. And so now let's move this over. We're going to want to go from this inventory reference and basically get all of the items in our inventory and repopulate our slots based on these items. So make sure we get the wrap box from the inventory and let's grab that. And first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to clear children. And the reason for this is because every single time we populate our inventory, we need there to be the exact amount of slots that are resized in. So if we don't clear this children, it can create an inaccurate amount of items that are actually in the inventory when it is not that amount of items. So we essentially want to clear the children from the wrap box. And then after this, we want to get, since we have all of the items in the inventory reference, we want to get those items and we want to loop through all of these items to see whether or not we need to update a slot. So in order to loop through, we need to get a for loop, and in this case it's a for each loop for each instance of the array. And let's pull that up off of the execute node. We need to go through the loop body now. So for the loop body, we want to create the widget, and the widget that we're going to create is the one that's going to go in each of these little slots. We're going to create a widget, create a widget, create a widget, and so it knows to do it every single time. In this sense, we're going to do w_item slot. This is basically going to create that widget every single time that we need it. Now, one thing that I did realize is that we have to go to w_item slot again, and we need to create a couple of variables so that we have them every single instance. So a couple of the variables that we need is we need to make sure that we have an item variable, because this will hold all of the item data. So just like we have it in right here, we need to have that as well. Go to item and make sure that we do s_item, excuse me. Drag that in, call this item, and we're going to need that essentially for our new Resident Evil things after part 1, but it also could be used here. So if you wanted to, you could do this right here, but I recommend just passing it through the custom event because we're going to call it in a second anyways. And we're also going to want to make sure that is instance editable expose on like so. And we're going to want to then get a reference to widget, get the inventory widget, or just inventory reference, grab that and go w_inventory grid. This is going to be used again, like I was saying, for later things. So let's make sure that we have the expose on spawn and instance editable. So, and we're going to also want the index. So this index is basically going to be the index in the inventory in which this slot has to be updated. So let's get the index, get the integer, and make sure we do the exact same thing. It's going to be instance editable and expose on spawn. And if you're confused what these mean, instance editable means that it's public, so now it can be changed on every instance. And expose on spawn means that once we go back here, you'll see now we can see them on the spawning or the creation of that widget. Perfect. So this is all we need for right now. So we can compile and save. We're probably going to add upon this in the next tutorials. But for now, let's keep it like so. We're going to want to make sure we pass in this array element because that's the exact item that we're on currently. Pass in the array index to the index variable we made. And then from inventory reference, since we are in the w_inventory grid, we can just go off of here and just say self. Now the inventory reference will be the self actor, or the one that we're doing. And let's clean this up a little bit so it is more clean. So I'll just do that, and we'll make sure all of these are lined up. That's okay. Perfect. So now that we have this, we're going to want to go off of this and basically call this refresh slot that we made previously. And the item will be the exact same item that we got from here. So let's get a reroute node and reroute it up here so it's a little bit more clean. And so that item is going to be passed directly into the refresh slot so we can use it. And after this is done, we're then going to add the child to the wrap box. So let's get the wrap box inventory right here. And we're just going to basically add child to wrap box. And this is going to add the specific item underscore slot and add it right into the wrap box that we want. So we can go right off of this return value and we can reroute these again so it's a little bit more clear. And so now we have this full working like this. This is perfect. This is exactly what we want for now. Now, if we go back to our blueprint component for our inventory, we want to call that function we created. So we're going to call refresh, and we're going to actually need those. So we can go right here to inventory reference and refresh inventory. And so now this is going to refresh the inventory based on what we have. And this is, you can see if you're ever confused what we actually need. It says we need BPC inventory component, and we are in it. So what that means is we can just get self once again. So now we have self of the, well, like that. Great. So now compile and save. And now that's going to run as soon as the game starts. But we actually need some functionality to open our inventory. So what we could do is we can go off of right here, go enhanced, input action. We need it for the inventory. And whoops, that's not the right one. So you can just look up inventory, and IA underscore inventory is right here. Off of this triggered, we're basically going to do all of our functionalities to check whether we can open the inventory or not. So the first thing is we're going to go off of triggered. Let's get an if condition. We have to make sure that it's not in the viewport so we can actually open the inventory. So let's get the widget reference. We have to see is in viewport. And if it is in the viewport, then we can't do it. So we want to make sure it's not the viewport. And if it is not in the viewport, then that means that we can actually open it. So let's go off of true, and let's add to viewport. It doesn't know what we're talking about, so we have to do it off of here, add to viewport, like so. And now if we go off of true, you can see that all is correct. So now we have that into effect, but we need to show the mouse cursor. So what we can do is we can get the player controller, just like so. And you want to go off of this and make sure you also get the right player controller. Sometimes you can get the player state, which is not the one that you want. And then you want to show mouse cursor. You want to set the mouse cursor, not get. You want to show it. Check that. And then you're going to, and let's actually clean up a tiny bit. So, and let's make sure that after this, we then set the input mode to UI only. Mode UI only. Do it like so, because we're going to have an inventory, so we need to move our mouse around to move slots from one slot to another and such like that. So then let's go off the inventory reference. You want to get the inventory reference, that directly into widget. Perfect. So now we have that set up correctly. And lastly, we're going to want to make sure it is focusable. So make sure you just set it to is focusable and set that to be true. Perfect. So let's comment this really quickly just so we don't get confused. This is going to be for opening or just for inventory action. Perfect. And let's change it to be a little bit of a lighter color, just so we can get to this. Perfect. Now we have the inventory action, and we can move this up a little bit and just change this to be the in play. And obviously you guys don't have to do this. I'm just doing it just so it all looks good for the tutorial and everything makes perfect. So now we have that set up. So now we can open our inventory, but we're going to make sure we can close it as well. Great. And so there are many ways to do this, but one of the ways that I can make it so we can actually close the inventory as well, since we're using the tab key, we can make it so there is an on key down function. So if I go right here to the inventory grid and I go to override on key down, we want to make sure it is the escape key, and then we can essentially close the inventory. So this will be very quick, but we just want to go to make it a branch, and we want to see if the key event in, so we want to get the key, if that key is equal to the tab key. So get the tab key. If it is not equal to the tab key, but not this one, not equal to the tab key, let's move this up. And what that means is that we're in the actual thing. So we want to basically change it now to be the game input mode game only. So let's get the player controller. So this, and just set input mode game only. So right into there. And then you want to show mouse cursor to be false. Show mouse cursor, set show mouse cursor. You want that to now be false, and like so. But lastly, you want to move it out a little bit more and change it so now there is you want to remove the widget. So you can remove from parent, and since you're actually in the widget itself, you can just do it from target self, and then this can go right into the return handled, and the return value will be handled like so. And we can file and save, and this is all you really need. And basically this is just checking to see if it's not the tab key, and if it is, then we're going to want to make sure that we're doing the game only now afterwards, because we're closing the inventory. So now if we go into the game, if you press the tab key, you'll see that it opens, and when we go over them, they highlight, which is really great. This is exactly what we wanted. We press the tab key again, you can see sometimes it goes into here, but if you click, oops, I think I made a mistake. The one mistake I made was that this is supposed to go off of false and not true. So good on you if you caught that. That's supposed to go off of false. So you can see now if I go in and press it, it goes on and then off, which is exactly what we want. So that's perfect. Now we have our inventory actually working the way it's supposed to. Additionally, you can also see we have 12 slots right here. So we have the 12 slots that we wanted. If you wanted to have 8, you could always change this inventory grid right here to be resized, and then change the inventory size to be 8. All right guys, so it seems I thought I was recording a lot of this tutorial, and it seemed it actually wasn't recording. So I did a little bit of the tutorial. I'm gonna go over exactly what you guys have to do. I'm just not gonna obviously code it over again. So what you guys are gonna want to do is, after we make the inventory actually appear, let's go to the BP_base item, our base item, and we're going to have to actually change it because it's now going to act a little bit different compared to what we made previously. So previously we had a base note and a base health item, and so now we're essentially going to want to make it so it all just comes straight from the base item itself. So temporarily these items are not going to work in this current state, but you'll see exactly what we do. We will fix that later on. So what we're going to want to do is go to our BP_base item, and we're going to want to add a variable. So the variable we're going to want to add is of type item, and in order to find this s_item, we're literally just going to type s_item, just like so, and click on this, and you're going to have an item variable. I just added this one. You don't need that one. Just make it as item, and let's put it into the inventory category. Let's make sure it's also instance editable, and make sure that you bring it into the scene. And once you do that, you want to break. So get a break, and all that does is it makes it so you can see all of the different variables that we created in our struct. So let's get that struct, and let's make sure we get the item mesh, and let's bring that in to be the new static mesh, because we no longer want to have it so there is an input for our inspection. And I also deleted that, I just realized. So before, where was it? Before, there was another row here for you guys for your actual variables, and you'll probably still have it if you follow along with the tutorial. you're essentially going to want to make it so now there is no item mesh and all of that that was hooked up to right here for the inspection. We're now going to want to make it so we can get the item from, we can get all of those variables directly from the inventory component instead of from the item. So I think it was item name, item description, item mesh, all of those, we can delete those variables over here wherever they were. I already deleted them, but we can now get them directly and derive them directly from the item itself right here. So we'll break it again. You can just go break like I was saying, and you'll get all of these variables. And we want to put the name into the name for the inspection. We want to put the description into the description and the item mesh right into inspected item. Perfect. So now that we have that, we can basically set up the same exact thing. So your inspection will still work. It'll still be the exact same way it worked previously. All of this is for the icons, how close the icons are. So that doesn't matter. This is where we'll be handling picking up items. So I didn't complete the tutorial yet. Just did a lot of it. So okay, so we want to go back to the construction script and make sure that this is the way that it's supposed to be. Remember, if your mesh is not showing the way that it should be after we create the entire actor and everything like that, make sure you set this. This is very important. And everything else should be the exact same. Here's how I have my variables laid out if you guys would like to copy those. We have the inventory in its own component or in its own category. Inspection variables are all here, and I put the item scale, which was one of the variables that was also there with the mesh and everything like that. I put that into the settings. So now if you want to change the scale, you can change it in these settings as well. Perfect. So now we can go back, and so basically I did a lot of the tutorial in the blueprint or BPC underscore inventory component. So I'm going to go through exactly what we have done. So every single time we add to inventory, we're going to be adding to inventory from the specific actor that we're interacting with. So when we're interacting with an actor, right here, we're going to basically call that add to inventory function. So in order to do that, we have to create that function in our inventory component. So let's create that function. You can click on this plus right here and type add to inventory. I've created it right here, and I'll go through this one by one so you guys don't get very confused. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure you go on this inventory or go on this function right here, this begin node, and make sure you click on it, and let's put an input actor of BP underscore base item. The reason for this is because we need to get all of the characteristics of the item right here. So we need to get these characteristics, get all these variables from that struct. And so in order to do that, we have to set the input to be the BP underscore base item actor. So once we do that, we can right click on it and press promote to local variable. That's what this L underscore local item interacted is right here. So you'll have that right down here, L underscore item interacted. And essentially we're going to, with this variable, use it to add the item's characteristics to our inventory. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our inventory or get the items in our inventory so we can drag it in. If you want to know how to do that, instead of having this appear, you can hold left control and drag it right in. You'll get items. And for this, we're going to have to loop or iterate through all of the different items in our inventory. So we're going to get a for each loop. And off of this, we're going to get the array element in the array index, and essentially going to do some stacking things with this to see if we can stack it or not. But before we do that, we have to make sure that the actor we're interacting with is actually valid. For multiple reasons. For one, because we want to not have any errors. And if you do this and you don't check this, sometimes you'll get error messages saying that it's none or there's no value accessible or whatever it is. So this is basically to make sure that we don't get any errors. Now, next thing is we want to make sure that the array index, we set that to the current index, which we made earlier. Again, if you don't know how to do that either, you can hold on Alt, your left Alt, and drag it into the scene, and you'll get a set node. And if you hold on left control, you'll get a get node. Anyways, we're going to set the current index to be the array index for that specific iteration. This will iterate over the list, and every single time it'll get a new current index. It'll get a new, all the new characteristics for the items. Perfect. So now that we set this current index, we have to originally check and see whether we should stack these items or whether they're not stackable items. This is important because if we go back here to our actual designer, we have certain items that are going to be stackable. So for example, if we have apples in this first slot, if we want to stack apples, we should have once we click on our first apple, once we pick it up, it'll populate the grid with one apple. And then if we pick up another one, it'll have another apple, but it'll have 2 in the bottom left right here. So we need to update that every single time. So if it's a stackable item, we have to know that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create another function. You can click on this plus right here, and let's call it should stack item. So let's go to that function right now. And essentially for the input, we're going to want to get a couple things. We're going to want to get the item from the inventory, and we're going to want to get the item from the current actor. And if you're confused, like how do I know which one is which? Basically, if you go back to the add to inventory, you're iterating through the inventory. So you know that this array element for each loop is giving you the inventory slot. And the local actor that we originally set and we got from this input, that is the item that we're interacting with from the current actor. That's how you know about that. But originally what we want to do is we want to make sure that they are both s_items. That's very important because that holds our data. And we want to basically go off of each one and just break. And that's exactly what I did here. So you're going to break and you're going to want to expand both of these. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to first check and see if the item that we're interacting with is an item that should go into our inventory. So right here, we're going to go off this Boolean and check and see if it can go into our inventory. So we can and bool. So if you're confused how to get that, you can look up and bool and it can give you multiple ones. So we did it for 4 different pins because there's 4 different conditions we have to check. So we check if our item inventory is true, and if it's true, then it has to go into our inventory. That item does. The next thing we check right here, the second condition, is we're going to check and see if the names are the same. And the reason for that is because if the names are the same, then this means that we passed an iteration in our array or in our list that the names matched with the current actor that we're interacting with. And so now we have to check and see if they're stackable or not, because if they're stackable and the names match, that means that they should be stacked upon. The number of them should be incremented. So that's basically what we're doing here. We're checking to see if the names are matching. And if they are, we're going to add that in here. That's another and condition. Then we're going to want to see if they're stackable. If they are stackable and the names match and it has to go into the inventory, then there's only one thing left to check. We have to check if the amount in our inventory right here and the amount in the current actor that we're interacting with is surpassing the maximum amount allowed per item. And so you can change this to be whatever you'd like. This is 30 in my case, which basically means if we have 29 apples in our inventory, and let's say we interact and we pick up 2 apples. So we pick up 1 apple and then we pick up another apple. That second apple will pass this max amount per item threshold, which will not allow, this will return false then, and it'll not allow us to stack it, right? It'll return cannot add them, okay? That's all this is doing. Basically, it's a series of conditions that it's checking. It's first checking to see if it's allowed to be an item in the inventory. Then it's checking to see if the names match. If the names match, then we should check and see if they're stackable, because if they are, then we should stack them if they're allowed to be stacked. So we need to see if the items names match, and then we need to see if the item is stackable. Remember, this is from the current actor. We need to see if it's stackable, and then we need to see if after we stack them, after we add them together, if this is still less than the maximum amount allowed per item. Perfect. So now if this is true, if this and condition returns true, that means all of these conditions were true. And so we want to return true here. And so if you don't know how to get to return node, you can just type return node just like so, and you'll get the return node just like so. We want to make sure that for a return node, we're outputting a Boolean that's just can add and an integer that's the new item amount. And so both of these are very important for us, because if we can add it, then we want to pass that value on so we know whether it's a stackable or not. And the new item amount is also very important. So if we can add them, that means that this value that we got right here from adding them together should go directly into the new item amount. Essentially, the added together one, them two added together are allowed to be they're less than or equal to the max amount, so it's allowed. So we want to get that value and pass it right into the new item amount. But if this is not stackable, then we only want to get the amount that's in the inventory already. And so to do that, we can just go get the new item amount directly from the item in the inventory. So for example, if we have 29 apples and we pick up 2 apples at the same time, let's just say it's 1 actor, but for whatever reason it's 2 apples, then it'll do it right here. It'll do 29 plus 2, which is 31, which is not less than or equal to the max amount. So this will return false, and it'll get the original amount, which was 29, because you can't add them together. Perfect. So this is the should stack items function. This is all that we're doing basically right here, and I hope I explained it in a way that's easy to understand. Perfect. So now let's go back. We're passing in the value from the array, from the inventory, and we're passing in the local item that we interacted with. And off of this, we're going to basically do an if or a branch. Either one does the exact same thing. And we're going to connect in the condition. And off of true, we're going to want to stack the item. And off of false, we want to basically add the item for the first time. So I'll go through them one by one. So if this is false, remember that means that this returned false. So one of these conditions was false. So if it should not be stacked or is the first time picking up stackable item, that's what this is in control of. But let's go through this one by one. So if this is false, that means it's probably either the first time we're picking it up or it can't be stacked at all. But before we pick it up, we need to make sure that there's enough space in our inventory. And the reason why we're not doing that up here is because this is handling stackable items, so it's already going into a certain stack. So we don't need to check and see if there's enough space because there's already a allocated slot for that specific item. So we're going to check and see if there's space in inventory. So in order to do that, let's go to the top left, press plus function, and let's get space in inventory. And thankfully, this is a very easy function for us to understand. So all this is doing is it's getting the amount of the item from the inventory. So basically we're just going to get an integer input and we're going to get the item amount from inventory. And we're essentially going to want to check and see if it's equal to 0. The reason for this is because if it is equal to 0 or no value, it's essentially going to say that there's no item in that slot. So for example, if there was an item in that slot, the item amount would either be 1 or 2 or whatever up to 30, because that's what we set the max amount per item to be. But if it's 0, that means that there's no item currently in that slot, which means that we can add it because there is space. Hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty self-explanatory, I feel. So we're just going to then go off of this true and do a return node again, and we're essentially just going to return if it has space or not. So let's just make a boolean and call it has space. And if it does, then we're going to, if this returns 0, then that means that there is space to add this item. So we just do has space as checked and has space as false off of this false. Perfect. So now we know that there is space. So off of this true that there is space, we need to do a little bit of array arithmetic, kind of. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the item that we interacted with right here. We're going to get that item and we're going to get item just like so. And all this is this is the structure that we made in the beginning. So we're going to get that structure and we're essentially going to call the insert function. If you don't know what that is, that's fine. All it does is it inserts an item given an index into that same array. So we're going to basically get the current index. And remember that current index is coming straight from here from this for each loop. That's the one that we set originally. So we set this value because we need this value right here. So essentially what we're doing is we're just going to insert this item that we are interacting with right now into the array of our inventory. And if you don't know what an array is, just imagine, like you can see it right here. I'll just add a couple. All it is it's multiple different items. So imagine this is an apple, this is a book, whatever it may be. They're all different items inside the array of items, which is the inventory. Great, so I'll delete all those because there's no default values. But this is how it would be. So basically we're inserting it into the array, which is adding the item to our inventory. And essentially we're then going to have it in our inventory. But what happens is, since we started the event graph with resizing it to inventory size of 12, what it's going to do is it's going to add that item to our array, but since it's inserting, it's going to then basically make a 13th element. And so what we have to do is we have to delete the last index in order to compensate for that added index that this is giving, if that makes sense. So imagine you have right here, I'll show you. If we have our whole inventory full except for this last slot, or except for this first slot, excuse me, then we're going to add that item, and then it's going to see if there is space. So if we go back, we're going to see if there is space, and if there is space, then it's going to insert that item. But what will happen is once we add it, it's going to add another box right down here in this bottom left, and that's not what we want. We don't want another box right there. So what we need to do is we need to compensate for that by removing index. And so all you have to do is go off of items and just remove index, and the index that we're removing is the inventory size minus the current index, and that'll give us the index that we have to remove, which is perfect. And then after this, since this is basically adding it to our array, we have to now update or refresh our inventory to now compensate and show this. So perfect. All we're doing is then running this straight to the refresh inventory, and we're passing in from the target the inventory reference, which is right here. And we're then going to have the inventory reference component is self, since we're in the inventory component. Perfect. So now let's go off of if this was true. So if this stackable items return true, then that means that an item should be stacked. It's in the inventory. This needs to be a stackable item. So since we know this, we're going to go off of this true, and we're going to set the new amount to be the amount that was added. If you guys remember right here, this amount that was added is now the new amount of that item. Great, so we're going to set that, and then we're going to basically get the actor that we're interacting with. So remember this local actor that we set in the very beginning. We're going to get that guy, and we're going to go off of him and get the item right here. This is the structure that we're dealing with, and we're going to break it and basically get all of these values. So essentially, we want to keep everything the same. We want to keep the inventory the same, the item name the same, the item description, stackable, all of this except for the item amount, because now we're adding a new item. So because there's a new item, we have to increment that and add by however many that we picked up. That's what we did right here. But since we passed that value along, it makes it very easy for us to now just take that variable that we set and pass it into the new item amount. So essentially, we're basically just rewriting the element at that array index with the new array element that we made, but just with the new, everything is the same, but just a new amount. And that's all we're doing. And then right after that, we're basically going to set the array element. So in order to do that, you go off of, you just want to get the items and go off of that and just set array element right here. And what that does is it's given an array and an index, and it assigns the item that you pass in to that array element. So perfect, that's exactly what we want, because we already have the stackable item. We just now need to keep that index, and we want to pass in the new amount to that given index in this obviously inventory array. So perfect, that's exactly what we want. And again, afterward, we need to refresh the inventory. And now is when I realized that I wasn't recording. So now we're all caught up. So after this, we're basically just going to want to get the item. And we're just going to want to destroy the actor, because now we're no longer interacting with it. We picked it up. It should be in our inventory. And lastly, we just want to call a return node, just like so. Return. We can compile and save this. And now we want to call this function. We want to call the add to inventory function when we interact with an item. So right here, when we pick up that item, instead of that, we want to call add to inventory. And if you realize, there is no add to inventory. And the reason for that is because we are in the BP underscore base item. Luckily for us, on our on interact, we can get our inventory component and call add to inventory from that, which makes it very easy for us. We can pass that in right to this false value and bring this down just like so, make it straight. And then the actor that we're interacting with will be self, because BP underscore base item is self. So we can just do self just like so and keep it just like this. And now we compile and save. we can add in a couple of items and test this out. So let's do that right now. Let's go to our map and let's just add a section over here. So I'll just duplicate this, I'll duplicate and bring it over. And I'll duplicate this text as well. And we're essentially going to want to call this inventory items, right? So this is what this is. This will be all the inventory items. So let's save everything. Make sure you keep saving everything. And like I said previously, we're just going to go to the BP underscore base item and let's just drag it in, and we'll just call this, for example, BP underscore pills. And so let's set this up to be pills. So like I was saying previously, we want to go to item, and we want to first check that it's an item in the inventory, because that's what it is. It is going to go into the inventory. Let's call the item name pills. Let's call the description. Let's see, what is the description that I used before? What did I type here? I'm going to copy and paste it over. I typed an empty pill container. Seems like it's been here for a while. Now let's just say these pills are not stackable, and the amount that is in this one item should not be 0 ever. It should always be at least 1 because you're picking up an item. So the item amount is 1. Now the mesh, we can find that where we implemented it, which is right in the pills mesh container. So let's bring that in, and just like so, it'll be there. Now we will change obviously the scale in a second, but just keep it like that for a second. And then we also want to get the pills image, bring that in right here. And let's just assume in this context that the pills are not healable. It's just an item that we can interact with. Okay, so let's just keep it like this. Now let's go through the rest of our settings and change some of the other settings. So for example, if this is the item location, we can make it like 20 maybe, because this will be a smaller item. And let me see what I set this item to be. So the scale is going to be 0.03 all the way across the board. So you can see it's a little bit smaller, but this is good because it's pills, so it probably should be a little bit smaller. Drag it down, take off snapping, drag it down so it's right about at the edge here. And great, so now we have some pills. So on top of that, and rotate it, and again, if you want to, I did in my other version, but you can always just set up the rotation again in the construction script, so you also have that there to edit here as well. But okay, we'll edit it in the rotation there, and we can do a couple of things. So if we want to, we can first make sure that the interaction still works. So let's change the interaction like so, and let's first call this as an inspect item. Okay, so what that'll mean is the inspect will take precedent. So if we go here, and if we go to this item, you'll see everything works as normal, and it'll actually inspect this item. And you can see on the top left, the pills and an empty pill container, seems like it's been here for a while, automatically updates, and that still works as intended, which is perfect. So now that'll do its job, and we still also can view our inventory. Now, because that's an inspectable item, and we haven't set up the functionality to make inspectable items also be picked up and added to our inventory, it's not added to our inventory as of right now. But if we go to this, and if we turn off inspect, and now go back into the game and play from here, if we add it to our inventory like so, you can see that now it's in the top left of our inventory. Also, we have found a problem, and it's when we hover over this, it doesn't display all of the information about it. And I know why that is. We haven't actually implemented that in the item slot, but we'll do that right after this. But you can see that it adds it to our inventory, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So let's actually add the functionality so it shows up whenever we hover over this button. So let's add that functionality now. Thankfully, in order to do this, it's actually really easy. So we can just go to designer really quickly, go to the item button, go all the way down right to on hovered, and we can do it just like so. And essentially we're going to want to see if, firstly, if the widget is valid. And it's just good practice to do this is valid. You don't want to have errors where it's just saying, oh, there's no value. And so you want to make sure that it is a valid widget firstly. And you want to make sure that now we get the item that we're actually interacting with. Let's get the item, and like we always do, let's break it so we can get certain values from this item. We want to get the name and description so we can set it and it automatically goes. So let's go to the widget reference and let's set name, set item name, just like so. And if it is valid, we want to do this. So we want to set the item name right here. And then we also want to set description. and let's bring it just like so. So now we put that up here, bring the description just like so, and now we have it so when we hover over it, it'll automatically update the description. Now if we unhover over it, we don't want to show this though. We want to make it so now if we unhover, that it goes back to as if nothing was hovered. In order to do that, it's very simple. We just want to make sure we go and get an unhover event. So if we scroll down again and we get unhovered just like so, let's bring that down. Now this one, we can basically keep the same logic. We don't need to check this now because we know that it is valid, because we only can unhover if we're already hovered. We don't have to check that again. We can go here and we can get the inventory reference and pass that right in just like so. And now this is no longer going to be like this. We can delete these and just make them blank. And if they're blank, what that means is there is nothing in the item slot, so it'll show up as no value. Perfect. So now if we test this, if we go in here, and first off, we should, because this isn't a stackable item, we did not make this a stackable item. If we create multiple of these, another one, and bring another one, they should all be in their own inventory slot. So let's first test that and make sure that they're all going in their own inventory slot. So if we interact with one, you'll see that it goes into our inventory, and you can see right here that there's another issue, which is that the auto wrapping text is not working. So we'll fix that right after this. But if we click on this one as well, you'll see it goes into a new inventory slot, which is very good. And if we go on something else, there is no text there, which is perfect. And again, it'll do it once again, which is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted. Now, let's fix it so that the inventory grid right here, this text is auto wrapping. So you just want to auto wrap text right here. It's really that easy. That's all you want to do. And so let's make sure we go back in and check it and make sure that that value is wrapping now. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Now let's test and see that stackable items also work. Just because that's also very important. We want to make sure that stackable items also work. So to do this, let's make sure that we add another type of item that we implemented earlier. Let's do bandages and let's make them stackable. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my content, back to my first person, back to blueprints, and let's drag in that base item once again. So let's make it, let's rename it pp_bandage. Perfect. And we're going to say it is an item in the inventory. Let's call it bandage. Let's see what I named the description in. And let me see. Right here. So it's used when hurt or injured. Will only slightly heal you, right? So let's say this is a healable item. And let's also say it's stackable. Let's say this is one item amount. Let's change this to be a bandage right here, just like so. And we need to change the image to also be that bandage. So we have it right here, the cover image, just like so. And let's say it's a healable item and it heals maybe 10 health. Now we haven't implemented this. We will implement this in the next part of the series. But let's just say that it's a healable item and it heals 10 health when you want to interact with it in the inventory. So you can see right now it's not showing up. The reason for that is probably because the scale of it is too small. So let me see what I made the scale in my other version. Yeah, so the scale for this should be right here. It's 8 by 8 by 8. So you can see now, you can actually see it. So let's add, so let's add a couple of these. Perfect. So let's add a couple of these. Let's move them around. Back. Come back as well. And bring this one over here, whatever. And let's make a couple of these. So because they are stackable, we want to make sure that they do stack. So let's add a couple. And do this. And firstly, we want to make sure that we can inspect them, right? So we want to make sure that we can inspect them. And we want to, yeah, first check that. So let's go into the game. And let's make sure that when I interact with this one, you can see that the inspection size is very small, so we can change that. We can change the inspection size, be something bigger, like maybe 10 by 10 by 10. I'm not really sure. We can test that. Let's go back in. We can play from right here and test it. So if I interact with it, you can see this is probably a better size that you'd maybe want, or maybe a little bit bigger, whatever you want to do. And also, we should change the height of this. So let's make this also 20. and 20 and 20. So now you can see all of the systems we've really made are working together to create a coherent system that all makes your game very interactable and dynamic. So now let's actually make sure that our stackable items are working. So they're all stackable, everything, all the settings are set correctly. So let us go in and play from here. So now if I click on one, you can see in the top left, there is a one icon that appears. Let me actually close game and make this bigger so you guys can really see. Perfect. So we interact, we get one item here, and you can see the bandage updates with the name and the description. Now, if I click on another one, oops, that one has inspection still enabled. But if I click on this one, you can see that updates to 2 now, which is exactly what we want. And if we click on this, you can see that gets implemented as well, and all of them get added as well. And this is exactly what we wanted, and everything works just the way it should. Now, through my testing, I found times where if you add certain ones, so let me make this not inspectable here. If you add certain ones first, it could mess up, and so I had to deal with that, and so now that won't be a problem either. So if you can see you add a pill bottle, then you added 2 of them, then you add a pill bottle again, then let's add another one, it adds right in the correct slot, and you can see everything works exactly as it should. Great. So now the inventory works as the way it's intended for the first part of this series. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the next tutorial, we will make it so when we click on this, it'll pop up a little list of things we could do with it. Like if it's healable, we can take it, or if we want to, we can delete one, or whatever we want to do with that. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below more tutorials you guys would like to see in the future. In addition, if you guys want these files or any of the files from any of the other things I've created here as well, you can easily go on the Patreon, and if you support me, you can grab all of these files as well. So you can get the healing system that we created that we will implement with our inventory. You can get the note system where we can read notes and do everything like that. You can get the inspectable items, everything like that you can do there, as well as going through doors, as well as the actual door system. If you want to push blocks, we have a watch, we have so many different things, footsteps, metahumans, whatever you want. It's all in that Patreon project. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye, everyone.